Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the October 19th installment of the 2010 Fall Honors Colloquium on Race. I am Gail Farris, the Assistant Director of the Women's Center and a member of the 2010 Honors Colloquium Committee on Race. Before I begin tonight's presentation, I'll handle a little bit of housekeeping. The vital information is where the bathrooms are, and the women's bathroom is to my left and down the stairs, the men's to my right and down the stairs. Importantly also are the exits. There are 2 in the back and 2 in the front, making 4 exits. We would like to announce to you and remind you that the URI Theater Department is showing their production of Spinning into Butter. Spinning into Butter coincides with our week here, our presentations throughout the colloquium. The next presentations of Spinning into Butter will be on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday this week at 7:30 and at Sunday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The other thing I'd like to bring to your attention is that next week we have Leo Chavez, Professor of Anthropology at the University of California, Irvine. Leo Chavez will be talking on why immigration reform is so difficult, Latinos as threat in the media. Throughout this colloquium, we have heard from various scholars and activists and even an actor on how race has informed and influenced our culture, economy, politics, environment, healthcare, and education. In fact, there is hardly a space that goes untouched by race and racial inequality, and to be fair, the pursuit for racial equality. Tonight's talk, Civil Society, Can We Protect the Rights and Liberties of All Communities? We will hear from Mr. Kareem Shora, the Senior Policy Advisor for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and recent past National Executive Director for the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, the ADC. The intention of tonight's conversation is to add to our growing understanding of how to break stereotypes and find new ways in which to talk about race, racial difference, and racial and ethnically motivated inequality. Mr. Shora is here to help bring attention specifically to the urgent issue of discrimination and hate directed toward Arab Americans and Muslims across our country, and to provide answers about what is being done to respond to and combat these injustices. Before I sit down with Mr. Shora, I would like briefly to provide a context for our dialogue tonight. As you may be aware, following September 11, 2001, Arab Americans have experienced a massive increase in the incidence of violent hate crimes. Today, the ADC reports that the Arab American community continues to suffer from increased levels of discrimination and are the principal focus of government surveillance and policies that restrict individual freedoms and protections and infringe upon civil liberties. According to the ADC, immediately following 2001, there were over 800 cases of employment discrimination against Arab Americans, approximately a 4-fold increase over the previous annual rates. In a 2002 study done at the University of Michigan, by surveying the largest Arab American community in the United States, the study found that 15% of those surveyed said that since 9/11 they personally had a bad experience due to their ethnicity. These experiences included verbal insults, workplace discrimination, special targeting by law enforcement or airport security, vandalism, and in rare cases, vehicular and physical assault. A third also said they received gestures of support from non-Arabs after the attack. Today, the Department of Justice reports that since 9/11, there have been 800 incidents involving violence, threats, vandalism, or arson against Arab Americans, Muslims, Sikhs, South Asian Americans, and other individuals perceived to be of Middle East origin. In 2009, Homeland Security appointed an Arab American to the position of Senior Policy Advisor, Mr. Kareem Shora. While some saw the appointment as prudent, others saw it as, well, just take a look.
DHS Secretary Janet Napolitano swore in Kareem Shora, also a devout Muslim, who was born in Damascus, Syria, as ADC National Executive Director as a member of the Homeland Security Advisory Council. Wow.
Kareem Shora was born in Damascus, Syria, and is fluent in Arabic. He immigrated to the United States with his family at the age of 14 and settled in Huntington, West Virginia. A product of Huntington Public Schools, he went on to study at Marshall University, receiving a Bachelor of Science degree in Biological Sciences. Continuing his education, Mr. Shora received his Doctor of Jurisprudence degree in 2000 from the West Virginia University College of Law. In 2002, he received his Master's of Law degree in International Legal Studies from American University's College of Law in Washington, D.C. For 10 years, Mr. Shora worked for the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee as both its chief legal counsel and as its national executive director. The ADC is a civil rights organization with a mission of defending the rights of people of Arab descent, and it acts as a framework for unified, collective, and effective advocacy in the correcting of stereotypes and in humanizing the image of the Arab people. Appointed in 2009, Kareem Shora became Senior Policy Advisor in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. One of his main responsibilities in this position is to engage with diverse communities and respond to public concerns regarding the policies and practices of the Department of Homeland Security. Our guest is a sought-after speaker, is widely published, is the recipient of numerous awards, and is a frequent lecturer. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Kareem Shora to the University of Rhode Island. We're going to start this evening with a few questions, and then after we have a few questions, I'll put the questions out that the audience members might want to ask. Kareem, you've been called everything from a terrorist to a jihadist. How do you respond to such public criticism?
It's a very good question. You don't. I've always let my work do my speaking for me. As you said, before 2009, I had been working in the civil rights field for 9 years, a little over 9 years. And while I personally did not face these types of attacks, I somehow managed to stay away from attention. I knew of others who had faced a lot worse. And we really need to take this in context. Look at the story of how our country has had many unfortunate experiences of attacks against people because of their race, because of their ethnicity, because of their religion, because of belonging to any disenfranchised group or minority. And so when these things came up on the internet, it was right after the election of President Obama, and unfortunately some chose to engage in these kinds of things, primarily, as I saw it before joining DHS, to attack President Obama. There was a well-known machine geared towards attacking the fact that his father was Muslim. And unfortunately, we're still continuing to see that. And I think these entries on the internet were part of that effort. Still are. I still see them on the internet. I do want to make one very specific clarification, and that's very important. I was in fact politically appointed on the Homeland Security Advisory Council. But then my current position I openly competed for as a full-time senior policy advisor with the rest of the population. It was a public announcement, open position on USA on the government's websites for employment. And when I accepted the full-time offer, by law, I'm required to withdraw from Homeland Security Advisory Council because it's an external advisory body for DHS. So, but that's a minor technical thing that I needed to clarify.
Thank you. Okay. In the briefing on domestic wiretapping and the war on terror before the United States Commission on Civil Rights in January of 2010, you described the action taken by the U.S. government in the wake of 9/11 as being unfortunate, ineffective, and largely cosmetic. You said that this has left a bitter taste within the Arab, Muslim, and South Asian American communities and was a mark of shame on American society. Can you expand on that statement?
Yes, absolutely. This comes from testimony that I provided before the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights in Washington, D.C. I think it predated 2010 because it was before I joined DHS. It was in my role at ADC. But the statement is really a record of the policies that were pursued by the U.S. government after 9/11 that were simply ineffective and did impact the Arab, Muslim, and South Asian communities in a way that it didn't impact others. We saw programs requiring people to register through special registration processes because of their ethnicity and religion. We saw lists of countries that were being scrutinized. There were allegations related to the surveillance of mosques, of Islamic centers, of faith-based institutions. All of those are challenges that our country has faced in the past with other communities, and we continue to face it today.
And with all these restrictions, as a result of these initiatives, it is our understanding that the U.S. government is yet to point to a single terrorist charge with terrorism as the result of these targeted programs. That they've never, what impact have we seen, positive or negative, as a result of this kind of surveillance?
Right. I was probably referencing a very specific program when I was testifying, and then let me bring it into context. There was something called the National Security Entry-Exit Registration System, or NSEERS. And that was a program that required people from 24 countries to register with U.S. authorities, and it was a bit more detailed than that. But that's a program that was started in 2002 and is being phased out, was phased out partly in 2005, not completely, and it's something that we're still working on at DHS. So while I can't speak to the details of that program, I was referencing it when I was testifying before the U.S. Commission, and I, in fact, referenced Senator Russ Feingold of Wisconsin, who was on the Senate Judiciary Committee at the time, and he asked that question directly during a Judiciary Committee hearing. And the answer came back in writing from federal officials. I don't remember who it was exactly. I think it was the Attorney General at the time, demonstrating that this effort of registering people, while when it was announced by former Attorney General John Ashcroft in 2002 as a counterterrorism initiative, 6 years after that took place, at the time, the U.S. Department of Justice was not able to point to a single terrorism conviction as a result of that program. So I was making the argument that then that program is an inherent failure if it was supposed to capture terrorists, and we can't point to anything. All it resulted in was increased immigration enforcement, targeting people from specific countries. And in fact, we know that thousands of people ended up being deported because of civil immigration violations, and tainted with a program that was being sold publicly as a counterterrorism initiative.
4 years ago, President Bush ordered the National Security Agency, the NSA, to illegally spy on American citizens by monitoring electronic communication, including phone conversations made between the United States and foreign countries, specifically Middle Eastern countries. This order was in direct violation of the law. What have been the negative effects of such targeting in the Arab American community?
This was, I think, part of an op-ed that I published in the Boston Globe at the time. And it's in reference to a program. My friends in the civil liberties world know a lot more about it than I do. We worked very closely with the American Civil Liberties Union at the time on this issue, where at ADC we saw a huge impact, a tremendous chilling effect by people who were simply fearful of government. Now we need to remember why people came to this country. And I would reference specifically why a lot of more recent Middle Eastern immigrants chose to immigrate to the U.S. for political freedom, so that you're not afraid of the secret government apparatus looking over your shoulders. And when this came out, and the way it was described publicly, obviously we weren't privy to the details internally, the community reacted in a very negative way. People were really fearful of even making phone calls to grandma in the Middle East, because they thought that they're speaking primarily in Arabic, and, well, what if the translation got it wrong? Am I going to get a knock on my door by FBI special agents to ask me about my conversation with my grandma in Lebanon? And we were, in fact, at ADC able to document a number of cases where FBI special agents did contact individuals, U.S. citizens, and they produced lists of phone numbers that were being dialed to the Middle East, asking them who they were speaking with, why, what they were talking about. Now, in those situations, at least the examples that we were able to document at ADC at the time, the behavior was very professional. There weren't allegations of abuse or bullying by the FBI agents, but the very fact that an American citizen was being asked about a phone call from their home with no other evidence of wrongdoing, that created a tremendous chilling effect on the Arab American community. And that's why ADC made it a priority, and I published a few articles about it, including probably the one you're mentioning, which was in the Boston Globe.
I want to go back. I want to talk about the ADC a little bit. You worked for the ADC for 10 years. You had positions as the legal director and the national executive director. Would you tell us about that work and how it changed, especially in the pre and post 9/11 context?
I was fortunate because ADC really crafted my career in life, my path in life. I started off as a junior attorney a year and a half before 9/11, so I did see how we operated as a civil rights group before 9/11. I should note that ADC was established in 1980, way before my time, by a former United States Senator, Jim Abourezk, who was a Democrat from South Dakota. And the reason why Senator Abourezk made the decision to leave the U.S. Senate and establish this advocacy group was because of a very specific FBI sting operation, Operation Abscam, in Congress, where they used an Arab stereotype to try to bribe members of Congress, pretending that the person was an Arab sheikh, using a very negative stereotype. And Senator Abourezk was on the Senate Judiciary Committee at the time and held hearings about it. And it was a wrong operation. It was something that was, the only good thing about it is it generated ADC. And so when I joined ADC before 9/11, like I said, I was a junior attorney. We were dealing with a lot of issues, racial profiling, the depiction of the Arab stereotype in popular culture, educational institutions, harassment, hate crimes, employment discrimination. 9/11 changed a lot of things, as obviously we were all, our lives changed. But I can remember every single second of that. It was a very crisp Tuesday morning in Washington. I woke up in my apartment. I'm a news junkie. I turned on CNN, and they were reporting that a small plane had hit one of the towers. And we all saw what happened after that. We were all privy to what took place. I ran to the office. It was a block and a half from my apartment. And everybody, I was the most junior member of the staff. We were about 20 of us. And everybody was in shock. People were yellow, not knowing what's going on and how to react. Obviously the organization had institutional experience. That was very significant. It was and is the largest Arab American civil rights group in the country. But no one was prepared for the magnitude of the impact and the backlash that we saw after 9/11. There were positives. I remember within the hour, Chief Ramsey, who was the Washington, D.C. police chief, called the head of ADC at the time and immediately told him, "I'm dispatching a patrol car to make sure that your office is okay." And we actually had a Washington, D.C. police officer stationed at our reception office for the first 3 months after 9/11. And we also received a lot of negatives, a lot of hate messages. The hate crimes report we produced after 9/11 was by far the largest the organization had ever produced, with very specific examples. The initial reaction was really obviously not desirable, but expected. It was a knee-jerk reaction. We saw hate crimes. The first confirmed hate crime was in Mesa, Arizona, against a Sikh gentleman. He wasn't even Arab or Muslim, but because of his appearance, he was killed. He was tending his gas station, and someone knew there was a person with a beard and a turban at the gas station, and used an assault rifle and killed him in a drive-by shooting. And the FBI investigated, and the Justice Department prosecuted that person for hate crimes. Unfortunately, it all went downhill from there, because within a month we started seeing at ADC institutionalized acts of discrimination. Former Attorney General Ashcroft, unfortunately implemented a lot of negative policies that sometimes on their face and publicly looked like the right thing to do. The American public was mostly supportive of what was being done, but we were the ones documenting the negatives and how it was impacting our community in a very negative way. The one thing I can say is that gave me some tremendous experiences working with other communities. One thing that I've always publicly really reprimanded my own community is that before 9/11, I did not see ADC and the Arab American community working within the civil rights movement. Our friends in other minority communities had experiences that were much worse and much more longer term than we could ever imagine. Yet before 9/11, we weren't necessarily always there. We were not always there when racial profiling took place during the war on drugs in the 1980s against African Americans and Latinos. So after 9/11, luckily, the major national civil rights groups stood by our side. The National Urban League, the NAACP, National Council of La Raza. I remember the very first phone call I took was from a gentleman who headed the Washington, D.C. office of the Japanese American Citizens League. And he wanted to let me know that his executive director, who was on the West Coast, had sent an email to all his chapters telling them to physically contact the local Muslim communities and Arab communities and physically go over to make sure they're okay. There was a campaign by the JACL to actually, that Friday, make sure that mosques in the U.S. were protected. There were a few occasions where they actually held hands, symbolically obviously, but nonetheless they held hands and encircled a few mosques to show their support. So we saw a lot of acts of kindness as well. And most Americans, a great majority, that's how they felt. Unfortunately, some took advantage of the situation, and a lot of negatives resulted. But I can't overstate the fact that there were a lot of acts of kindness those days after 9/11.
Thank you. I wonder if we could go to the audience for a question or two. We have Professor Derbyshire here that will take a microphone in your area. Is there someone that might be ready to ask a question before I go on with my own?
I wanted to say thank you for coming here and welcome to Rhode Island. I just have a couple of questions. I'm very concerned about what's happening regarding activists, political activists in the country and Homeland Security. 2 priests were held at the Fort Lauderdale airport because they were actively involved in immigration issues. And Representative Charles Rangel ended up interceding for them, but the FBI or Homeland Security, I can't distinguish one from the other anymore, but they kept them together. Also, the computers that were confiscated by folks who are activists, who have been in Palestine and in Colombia and other places. And how does that work for you where you have to investigate Homeland Security itself when they violate people's human rights?
Excellent questions. And thank you for acknowledging the fact that I work for the office. We see the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties at DHS headquarters. We're the consciousness of DHS. Our job is to internally do what I used to do externally at ADC. The question relating to, number one, I do need to clarify that FBI is not part of Homeland Security. FBI is one of the probably few agencies that were kept under the Justice Department. They answer to the Attorney General of the United States, but most other enforcement agencies were in fact moved into DHS in 2003. But with that said, obviously airport enforcement, which includes Customs and Border Protection and Transportation Security Administration, are part of DHS. When these types of examples are raised, the first thing I would ask is people need to know that there is a process to file complaints. That's why I get paid full-time, is to help address these concerns. The office is actually a very large office with a lot of investigators, and we go around the country doing this. So a lot of times we find that there are misimplementations of policies, and we take corrective action up to the point of employment action against the individuals who are involved. Or if it's in fact implementation of an actual policy, we take that example and use it. My job title is a senior policy advisor. I advise on policy. I take those examples and demonstrate to my supervisors up the chain, all the way to the secretary, that this policy is wrong and here's why. It's impacting people on the ground in a negative way. It's not protecting our country. It's not enforcing the law. Obviously, one or two examples won't do it, but over time, things change that way. So I hope that sort of answers your question. I don't know about the individual cases that you mentioned, so I wouldn't be able to answer you. The question about computer searches, that's actually something that is a policy. U.S. Customs and Border Protection does search electronic devices that are coming into the country at ports of entry. Sometimes they do have to confiscate them and return them because they need to look at the data. Now, the reason why, to be quite frank with you, is child pornography. The only way for us to be able to control that, and unfortunately it became a very serious issue, is to engage in those searches. It's a very serious problem, and I think we would all agree that we want to make sure it doesn't happen. Child trafficking and child pornography. But with that said, obviously the window might be open for abuse. So what my office is doing now, it's been doing it for the past almost year, I believe, is a civil liberties impact assessment of that policy. We're basically conducting a study to see how these searches are impacting people's civil rights and civil liberties. And what we do is we report our recommendations to Congress and to the Secretary. And we say either we haven't located any problems, or here are the problems that we've located, here are the fixes we suggest to make sure that people's rights aren't abused when we search their laptops or their cell phones when they're re-entering or entering the U.S.
On that point, Kareem, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just a very brief comment. A friend of mine whose mother many years ago was being questioned by the FBI. The FBI agent said to her, "How come your uncle was over in the Soviet Union in 1913?" And she called him on it. She really gave it to him. And you get a problem if someone investigates you, and if that person doesn't have enough education, it's going to be a problem.
That's a very good point. I mean, cultural awareness in general is actually a major priority for my office. There's an entire team at CRCL, which we call Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. Their full-time job is to travel around the country and conduct cultural awareness trainings to local law enforcement, state law enforcement, all of our agencies, immigration enforcement, airports, etc. And we work in coordination with the FBI to train some of their agents in the field. But obviously I can't speak to the FBI. Anybody around here representing the FBI? Don't raise your hand. No, I'm joking. We work very closely with our colleagues at the FBI, and we do need to remember the FBI is the primary federal law enforcement agency in the country, and it does a lot to protect us. So while, obviously it's our job to check on them and make sure that they don't abuse the laws, we also need to acknowledge the fact that, they're fellow citizens just like us with the same diversity that represents the public, and sometimes they will make mistakes. But like I've often reminded my community when I was with ADC, while we filed lawsuits against the FBI, more than I can count, and we criticize them very heavily publicly, we also need to acknowledge the fact that they're the ones responsible for investigating hate crimes. They're the ones that investigated the mosque burnings and the vandalism and the murders. So, we do need to be even-handed in the way we view agencies as well.
Good evening, sir. Up to this point in your presentation, when referring to abuses of government agencies in terms of wiretapping, spying on private citizens, I would add infiltration of anti-war groups, of Muslim communities, and the like. You consistently and persistently use the past tense, was, which would lead some listeners to assume that you're talking about abuses that occurred during a previous administration, when there is a body of evidence out there right now on the record that anyone can investigate that not only suggests that it can prove that actually the situation of abuses of government agencies against the constitutional rights of American citizens has grown much worse under the Obama administration than it was under the previous administration. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
I'm not sure. The reason why I'm using the past tense, to be quite frank with you, is I'm reflecting on 10 years of work that I do with ADC. And that's where my experience comes from. In the past year, almost exactly a year now, I've been a full-time federal employee at DHS. I keep in very close touch with my colleagues in the civil liberties movement. Individually, I'm a card-carrying member of the ACLU, and I'm not ashamed to admit that, and I'll admit it in front of anybody. But I can't speak to what's going on now because I'm no longer doing the work. I probably would agree with you that the abuses probably do continue. The work that I did in 2008 is still being done by others at ADC and other groups, and as they should. One of the most effective factors in our overall system is the fact that we have such a robust, active civil society. Without them, I would not be able to do my job internally. I've often been asked, and I do want to address this, Gail, do you feel that you've sold out? You spent 10 years criticizing, fighting, suing against government policies, and now you're part of the government. You're part of the problem. And I would say no, because in the past year alone, and I can tell you this on a weekly basis without going into details, I've seen myself and my colleagues at Civil Rights and Civil Liberties stop things from taking place before they become things. And people don't often recognize that there are people within government who are civil rights activists, who are doing their job silently. When I used to achieve a victory at ADC, I could say, let's issue a press release and put it on the website and sending on the mailing list. Now when I achieve a victory, one of the major personal sacrifices I've had to make is the fact that I can't talk about it. I'm not allowed to say, oh, issue a press release, we stop this from actually becoming policy. But that's probably the biggest sacrifice I've made, is I do feel a sense of personal frustration where we achieve such a good thing, stopping government from abusing, yet by law, I'm not allowed to talk about it.
So are you saying, Kareem, that you can't tell us, let's say your community engagement team goes out, finds out about a problem, and you report that problem and you try to come up with solutions. Can you tell us where this might have happened and what it might have entailed and where it took place?
Yes, I can give you a sort of a bigger picture example. Relatively recently, earlier this year, if you remember the December 25th plot to bomb the Northwest flight over Detroit, shortly after that, and the media reported that the government created a list of 14 countries that we were going to be scrutinizing as part of our increased efforts to protect air transportation coming to the country. That policy was very heavily and immediately criticized by civil liberties groups, community groups, because the list of countries listed was clearly relating to a specific region of the world, and international partners. I mean, foreign governments didn't like the fact that they were listed, understandably. Within 3 months, and I'm not taking credit for this as just my office or as just DHS, but within 3 months of implementation, and that's lightning fast for government, for the federal government, let me tell you. The Obama administration announced that that policy is no longer in effect, and that we're being intelligent about how we protect air travel. That's something that's probably, the amount of effort it takes to change a policy in government, a policy of that size involving so many agencies, it challenges me to even describe it. I mean, I worked in D.C. for 9 years before joining government. I thought I knew how big and complex government is. I had no clue now that I see it internally. It is a massive, complex, bureaucratic system, but it's for a reason. It's complex and bureaucratic for a reason. That's what our founding fathers designed it to be. We don't want rash, crazy, immediate decisions. And I'm on public record in criticizing the USA Patriot Act when it was passed. That was the fastest, quickest piece of legislation passed by the United States Congress in recorded history. And it's because members of Congress did not feel that the 300-some pages of law that they were passing were worthy of reviewing or reading or having hearings on. Lightning fast. And we know so many abuses were generated as a result and continue to be generated as a result of the USA Patriot Act. So we can criticize government for being slow, but sometimes that's good to be slow.
I have 5 questions lined up, so be patient. I'm coming.
I also want to thank you for being here tonight, and I'm so impressed with the civil liberties that you're protecting in this country. I'm also somebody who's very concerned about the civil liberties of women and gay people in some of the communities of people who have come here. I'm wondering whether you ever share this concern, have any influence on foreign policy or what's going on in other communities overseas to protect the civil liberties of women or gay people.
Obviously overseas I wouldn't.
The Arab world, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't work for the State Department. DHS doesn't really have that role. But I personally agree with you, obviously, and I'm very happy personally that the Matthew Shepard Act was finally passed into law earlier this year. And the fact that we have robust protections against hate crimes against the gay communities in our country, something that's long overdue. So, and that, again, that is something that was passed relatively efficiently under this administration, and it's something that I personally have actually always supported. And when I was at ADC, we were part of the coalition to support the Matthew Shepard Act.
Hi. I have a question. I'm in support of the Obama administration. I was 19 the first time that I voted, and I was very proud to vote for an African American and a person that meant such diversity for the country. And I'm also a CNN freak, so I always have CNN on at all times. And I just see in the media how much they are criticizing President Obama for everything that he spoke about during his campaign, whether it's health care, whether it's lowering taxes for the middle class, whether it's helping college students, taxing the high class. And I just wanted to ask you, do you believe that all the criticism that President Obama is facing today has to do in part with his ethnic background?
I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question. I don't know. I mean, we all know how he was attacked during the campaign, and I can tell you that, based on my work in the past with ADC, I need to be very careful here. I hope you understand, because I need to make it very clear. I'm not speaking on behalf of DHS here. I'm here because I was invited in my experience with ADC. President Obama was very clearly attacked because of his race and because of his family's background. And everybody's familiar with the quote-unquote Muslim smear that he was tagged with during the elections. So I don't know now if the criticism is because he's African American or not. Well, it's a matter of public record where I stood on the elections. Just Google my name, and you know where I stood. And so personally, I continue to be in that position because I've seen personally the changes that the president promised he would make are being made, especially knowing how Washington works. The promises he made are being followed up on. The number of legislations he's been able to pass compared to other presidents in the past who had Congress in their own party on both sides. President Obama has bypassed every single one almost, I think, in documented history. So we do need to take that into perspective. And again, I have to reemphasize that this is my own personal belief because you asked me about my personal opinion.
I'd like to go back and get to the ADC for a minute, and then we'll resume in the audience. The ADC combats stereotyping of Arab Americans by educating groups on representation, particularly in the media, in television, in films, and in the news. In this world of Bill O'Reilly's and Fox and Friends, can you explore for us common mistakes and misunderstandings that we all see in the media?
I've always said the media, it's very easy to say, well, it's the media. You know, it's Fox News and Bill O'Reilly and all those characters, or others. The media is, the way I see it, is an ocean. It's an open ocean with currents, undercurrents, whatever you name it, and waves. And you just need to know how to use it, how to disseminate your information. Use it as a sounding board. And obviously sometimes it'll warp your voice. It'll change things around. I did a lot of work on the media side when I was with ADC. I went on, I did not go on O'Reilly, but I did go on Hannity's show, whatever it used to be called, Sean Hannity, a number of times, 7 or 8 times. I also went on Al Jazeera in Arabic, more than that, 20 times or so. And you just need to know how to use that process. Even in my position when I went on Hannity's show, obviously he was extremely hostile to me. But I was able, and I have copies, DVDs of my shows, where I was able to disarm Sean Hannity. And the last time I did it, I got the final word. I was able to time it as the music was playing in my earpiece. And I threw his argument back at him, his constitutional argument, from a very conservative perspective, but that's how I learned to operate, is when you're speaking to Hannity, speak from a law enforcement conservative point of view and throw his argument back at him. Obviously, I was a civil libertarian. I am a civil libertarian, and on those shows, that's why they invited me. It's an Arab American civil libertarian. By the way, I was never tagged as a devout Muslim until 2009. I'm not sure where that came from.
As a what?
Don't tell my mom. As a devout Muslim. I am Muslim. I was born Muslim. I'm a practicing Muslim. I'm not sure what the devout part is all about. But I hope it answers your question.
Okay.
I hope this isn't off the topic. When Catholics came to the United States, we were considered to be a danger to the American civilization. And now I think the same attack is made on Muslims, that the Quran forbids them to accept freedom of religion and separation of church and state. What do you say to people who have that kind of a view?
That kind of a view? I mean, you said it. Everybody knows if you remember or read about when President Kennedy first ran, there was the tag that, well, he's going to be, his allegiance is to the Pope. He's Catholic. He's undermining the United States. We're going to be, we're going to be reporting to the Vatican every time we pass a policy at the White House. So I think, again, we need to take what's going on today within context. I don't think we should be overreactive, but I think we should be reactive. We should be able to address it and tell our fellow citizens, this all-out hate, to be honest with you. I've seen it. It's all-out hate. I mean, the controversy surrounding mosques and community centers or whatever you call them, it's a joke. Take it and within the context of the history of the United States, to oppose the building of a faith house of worship, it just strikes me as if those who are very sort of intent on making a point out of it and turning it into apparently a political party almost. I really do wonder if they look back and think about what this country is all about, why it was founded. and the fact that you're basically targeting a specific faith, regardless of what that faith is, or someone's individual beliefs. I mean, it's actually contrary to the most elemental, conservative American values. So that's what I personally think about it. And in my personal capacity, I continue to advocate on those issues.
As a follow-up in regard to, the plans for the proposed Muslim Community Center in New York City, what can you tell us about what you feel the general atmosphere in the nation is in regard to hate crimes?
I can tell you even from the federal government perspective, the Justice Department Civil Rights Division issued a report on the 30th anniversary of our LUPA, which is, I don't remember what it stands for. It's the law that protects religious institutions, among other things. And they, in the report, this was 3 weeks ago, they were able to document that there were more investigations opened and incidents of hate against Muslim houses of worship after the New York City controversy started in the past, I think, 9 months or something, than there was in the past 30 years. So is that evidence that acts of hate or intolerance are on the increase? I would argue, yes. There's the notorious Murfreesboro, Tennessee mosque, which is still under construction, and people burnt the construction equipment there. Upstate New York, there's a similar example. Wisconsin, there's a similar example. Florida, there's a similar example. So there's definitely a wave of increased hate crimes. But it's not only targeting Muslims. I mean, it's been well documented that hate crimes against the GBLT communities is on the rise after the passage of the Matthew Shepard Act. So at least we now have the federal teeth to prosecute people when this happens, which unfortunately was not the case before it became law.
I have 6 questions lined up. Be patient. I'm coming.
Thanks for coming. It's been really interesting. I was really shocked this summer when I was following the French government's forced expulsion of the thousands of Roma, and, well, also at the lack of coverage, but that's a different issue. And I'm wondering, not to downplay the obvious struggles of the Muslim community in America since 9/11, and especially since the mosque controversy. In France, there are similar sweeping generalizations about the Roma being linked to crime. And I'm wondering if you think something like that, I mean, obviously it seems like it's just on a different level. And I'm wondering if you think something like that could happen in America or has happened in America, and why? No.
It can't happen in America. It won't happen in America. That's, no matter how bad things get, and I speak from experience. Part of my work with ADC related to working with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is the largest regional intergovernmental organization, second to the UN. And they do a lot of work on anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim intolerance. And I was fortunate to speak at a lot of their conferences during my ADC days. And I was able to compare notes basically with civil society, Muslim civil society primarily, in Western Europe, in Germany, in France, Netherlands, even the UK. No matter how bad it got here, and I saw it at ADC, it was much worse there for the communities. It is much worse there. They obviously, it's different societies, different systems. Migration patterns are different. Populations are different. So there are a lot of factors. But comparing notes, I used to think, it was bad, and it was pretty bad, even with government policies. But when I would go over there and learn about how they're able to address it as a community, how their civil society institutions operated compared to ours. They have it harder. And one time I was on a panel, I was speaking on behalf of ADC in Europe, and on a panel with someone from Homeland Security at the time. So I prepared with my points, to attack special registration, to criticize this, to criticize that. Same things I always use in Washington domestically. So I gave my speech, and he gave his response, and then others were giving speeches and responses. And even though I was extremely critical, as I've always been, over there I sounded like I was almost defending the U.S. government. Because, number one, the communities there viewed their governments as being much more intrusive and much less accommodating. They don't talk to them. There isn't that dialogue. There isn't that legal system. I mean, the fact that I can file a lawsuit against the Justice Department and still be able to meet with them, with the Assistant Attorney General, and talk about the lawsuit, they don't have that in most European countries. I found that firsthand. So the example you gave of mass deportations of the Roma Sinti in France, for example, or even the burqa ban that's going around in Europe, that's not going to happen in the United States. We're a country that's, I think, learned its lessons, or learns its lessons, sometimes painfully, sometimes very slowly. But right after 9/11, the first concern was, they're going to round up Muslims and put them in detention camps. And I've had friends who say, well, yeah, there's a detention camp in Louisiana. It was being built in the 90s. The American people don't let that happen. And our system has so many checks and balances built in. It's good to be cynical and critical. I'm all for that. But it's also good to put things in perspective.
I have two questions. What is the difference between your Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties and the Justice Department? It seems like duplication to me. And as for that mosque in New York, I understand its purpose is to promote understanding. Or can it be done from a few blocks further away?
For the first point that you make, the Justice Department and DHS are totally different agencies. They have a Civil Rights Division, which is the primary federal government's clearinghouse for all civil rights cases, external civil rights cases, prosecuting hate crimes, prosecuting employment discrimination. They have many sections. It's a very large branch of the Justice Department. My office is primarily a policy office within DHS headquarters that's designed to do a number of things. It's part of the immediate office of the Secretary, so it's at headquarters. And we oversee 20-some agencies. I'm not going to name them all or bore you with acronyms. But it's border, immigration, transportation, Secret Service, Coast Guard, federal, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, a lot of others. And our job is to make sure that our 220-some thousand employees don't engage in civil rights violations. We're not external. In other words, if somebody engages in a hate crime, that's the Justice Department. But if a transportation security office engages in racial profiling, that's my office. I hope that explains the difference. As far as your second question, obviously I'm not speaking on behalf of the community center that's being built in New York City, so I can't comment on it officially. DHS doesn't have a position, and the President has already spoken about it. But as a civil rights advocate and based on my experience at ADC, I can tell you that this has become more than, move it 4 blocks well, let's move it 10 blocks away. Or why not 20 blocks away? How about 50 blocks? How far do you go? Where do you draw the line? Who decides? Who makes that decision? The issue is about the fundamental rights, both privacy rights, private property rights, for those who are advocates of that, number one. They rightfully, contractually bought that property, and they have a right. They obtained the necessary permits, and they have a right to build whatever they want to build as long as it's legal. That's privacy rights. Number two, the constitutional element of it, of religious freedom. They have a right to do it. Now, obviously, we're welcome to debate whether a good idea, bad idea. But we need, number one, first to agree is they have an absolute right to do whatever they want on their private property. And I don't care if it's half a block away from the Pentagon. If it's private property and they choose to build anything that's legal, it's their right. That's what this country is about. And we do need to remember, people from all kinds of backgrounds died on that day in those towers. All kinds of backgrounds. And the first responders were from all kinds of backgrounds as well, including Muslims. We should remember that.
What do you think we should do as a country, as everyday people, to correct the misconceptions of Arab Americans so we don't promote discrimination?
That's a loaded question. I'm not here to give you advice. I think we're doing it, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I tend to be maybe overly optimistic. But I think I've spent enough years fighting discrimination to tell you that, number one, when the American people get a clear picture, they get it like that. They're on the right side, always, 100% of the time. I can guarantee you that. It may take a very long time and a lot of work. The ultimate result is always positive. And that's, I mean, I believe in hope. I still do. And so the American people just, I think they are doing the right thing. The pendulums always swing along the paradigm. But I think history tells us a lot about our society, about our system, about what our country has always stood for. And I often do use myself as an example of, when I introduce to myself to very diverse crowds, to very critical crowds sometimes. Sometimes I'm the first, quote-unquote, federal official they hear from, this suit coming from Washington, D.C. to talk to us. And I always introduce myself as saying, you know what, 3 years ago I had my name on lawsuits against DHS. Now I'm here speaking on behalf of DHS. I haven't changed. The same exact points I made against special registration in 2007, I'm making internally within DHS in 2010. Something I found out about the federal government is it's much more diverse as far as workforce than people give it credit for. There are a lot of very internal, very heated debates and exchanges between us internally about what we need to be doing. And it's all perspectives. It really is representative of society. And that's something that I personally didn't give the government credit for until I saw it internally on the inside. You win some, you lose some, obviously. And you can't publicize your losses and you can't publicize your wins, but it is rewarding when you do win.
I thought it was interesting that you said earlier that the American people wouldn't stand for something like, an internment camp for Arabs because, they have actually in the past. Obviously, the textbook case being, after Pearl Harbor, the internment of Japanese Americans. And now, more recently, we see some kinds of racial profiling against Arab Americans, such as you mentioned, like they have to register, there was a registration program, and it seems to me that this sort of mentality and the reason why people actually do allow these sorts of practices is because it sort of comes out of a psychological sense of like this need for security. Like if we just watch out for them, then we'll be safe. And my question to you is just, if people didn't have examples to look at, like if they didn't see a registration program for Arab Americans after 9/11, or if they didn't see practices at airports that might sometimes target people for wearing a turban or praying, practicing Islam in a public place, do you think that if there's possibility that hate crimes towards Arab Americans now could actually have been worse if citizens were kind of taking this, their idea of defending the country from Arab Americans into their own hands?
Number one, I need to be clear. It did not include Americans. The registration program did not include U.S. citizens. We're talking about non-U.S. citizens from certain countries. Just to be very, very clear. It did not include permanent residents or green card holders. It did not include U.S. citizens. Yeah, I still thought it was a bad idea, not me. Collectively, the civil rights and immigrants' rights movement felt it was a bad idea. And it's something that we're still working on, as I said. It was phased out, and we're working on addressing the rest of that issue. But going back to your first question about Korematsu, about the Japanese internment, it's true. We interned over 100,000 of our own citizens after Pearl Harbor. And what I was referencing was the fact that we learn our lessons. And so we didn't intern Muslims or Arabs after 9/11. We did a lot of very bad things that I fought against. Still fight against, but we didn't go that far. So we did learn our lesson from history. Before that, in history, there were the Chinese Exclusion Acts, where we basically said, no more Chinese in our country. We learned our lessons. After the Chinese Exclusion Acts, we never implemented such a policy against any group, even though many other groups face problems. You mentioned the Catholics, the Irish, the Italians, the Jews. They all face those problems. Some still do. Look at our friends in the Latino community as probably the biggest current example. Or that historically and still is an issue, even with the election of President Obama, with the African American community and the disparities in that community. So what I'm trying to say is that we do learn our lessons, though. I mean, the fact that an African American was elected President of the United States, had you entertained that idea 30 years ago, 20 years ago? I seriously doubt it. There were some who were serious contenders, but I'd seriously doubt it. So, I'm not sure if it answers your questions. I think you had a two-pronged question.
Yeah, the second part of the question was just, do you think that if there weren't signs of racial profiling, illegal though it may be, in practices, for example, at airport security checkpoints, et cetera, do you think that hate crimes toward Arab Americans could have been worse as a result if citizens felt that they had to defend the country themselves instead of relying on the government?
I mean, I don't know. That's presumptive. I really don't know if it could have been worse or not. I'm telling you it was pretty bad, and the FBI documented it. Right after 9/11, the FBI issues its annual hate crimes report, and even though it has its faults, it's not mandatory. It does reflect certain trends, and between the report before 9/11 and the report after 9/11, there was a 1,200%, that's 1,200% increase of documented hate crimes against Muslims in the United States.
Hi, I have two questions. One question is, you mentioned that immigrants coming into the country, they had confiscations of cell phones and stuff like that, and you mentioned how there was keeping track of phone conversations, and one you had mentioned was because of child pornography, and the other like a form of discrimination. Do you believe that there's tapping of cell phone lines for child pornography as well?
No, those are totally
Okay, I was
totally
confused,
separate
sorry.
issues, actually.
Okay, and then my second question, not to press the issue, sorry, but we're talking about rights of the American people. Do you feel that it is dishonorable to the people that lost their lives on 9/11 to build the mosque near Ground Zero in New York City?
I would, again, sorry I have to repeat this, DHS doesn't have a policy on that, but the President spoke, the Attorney General actually spoke, and I can tell you personally that no, it is not dishonorable because, number one, we were not attacked by a faith. We were attacked by violent extremists who were hijacking a faith. I often, when I spoke right after 9/11 for a few years, I used to become very passionate about it because I felt as a Muslim American that I was attacked twice on 9/11, on that same day, twice. First as an American, second as a Muslim, because those people attacked my own religion. They warped what the religion's all about. And so it's actually a very serious issue for me personally. There were Muslims who died in those towers, including first responders, firemen and paramedics who were Muslim, who were climbing up those stairs and it collapsed on them with everybody else. So to claim that their lives are somehow less significant than other victims is an offense to what this country stands for, what this country is about. Like I said, if it's a private property, if they choose to build a temple, a synagogue, a church, a gurdwara, a mosque, whatever it is, a community center, they have a right to do it. And we need to learn how to celebrate what this country is all about. It's in fact a mark of pride if that center is built, because it shows what this country is all about. And I would guarantee you that when we compare ourselves to other countries, I've often received the answer of, well, look at, and then they give me examples of other countries. Well, you know what? We're not that other country. We're the USA, and we've stood for something very specific historically. We shouldn't compare ourselves to others. We have our own standards to maintain.
Hi, thank you for coming. I have a short question for you. I wanted to ask you in class actually today. You were talking about wiretapping and, profiling and things like that, and I was just wondering what you thought about, maybe you could just speak a little bit about the Patriot Act and maybe just, do you think that there's room for reformation, or are we going to see some changes in coming years, or anything we can look forward to as far as that goes?
The Patriot Act, when I was at ADC, the Patriot Act was up for, there were sunsetted provisions that were due to expire automatically, and Congress took steps to make sure that they didn't expire. And I can tell you that ADC stood for the expiration of those provisions and for amending some of the controversial provisions. Now, some changes were made, and civil rights groups, civil liberties groups felt they were not enough, and that the Patriot Act is still abusive of people's rights. I probably am not informed enough, to be honest with you. I don't have the current information to tell you, well, here's what's going to happen next Congress. I don't know. People presumed that things may change, but it wasn't even a subject on Capitol Hill during this congressional session. So there's no way to make assumptions. You can't tell, regardless of how the elections go, the upcoming elections go. There's no way to tell because it's no longer really an issue. The Patriot Act is not on the agenda in Congress right now. and it's not due to be on the agenda anytime soon. So I'd be hard-pressed to say any changes will be made soon.
This will be our last audience question.
I'm honored. Thank you for coming to speak with us. My name is Danielle, and I'm a senior here at URI. You had mentioned earlier in this discussion that there are people in the White House who are silently fighting for civil rights. And I come from a very long background of people who are very loud about fighting for civil rights. I think that the silence kind of equates, especially on a college level currently, to inaction. And people don't know who to contact, and people don't know how to become a part of the discussion. So how would you respond to that, or how would you say rally some loud voices to become a part of the civil rights discussion, either related to your office or the government or just the town that we live in?
No, not the government. I mean, no, I'm being completely honest with you. On college campuses, in civil society, we need those voices. We need them loud. We need those lawsuits. I mean, I can tell you that because it gives me information, it gives me ammunition internally to use so that when we are advocating silently for civil rights, and that's the nature of government. I mean, government work is classified. That's the nature of the beast. So when we're doing our job, when there are loud voices outside yelling and screaming and lobbying our members of Congress and engaging in civil society, that helps, obviously. That's a huge factor. So I'm not saying government's the solution, not at all. Obviously, there's a role for government to play, and I'm delighted that we have civil rights advocates internally. That's something that, like I said, personally surprised me. But we still need those loud voices. I mean, my job, my team's job, the community engagement section is to meet with those loud voices, to go around the country, collect information, bring it back and say, listen, we need to address this. Otherwise, this group is going to file a lawsuit, or otherwise we're going to get a letter from Senator so-and-so. And sometimes getting a letter from Senator so-or-so is helpful because it puts pressure on us to do the right thing. So I'm all for it. I mean, I made a career out of being loud. I was very loud. I can't be loud now. I need to get my paycheck. But I'm going to tell you, please be loud.
Danielle's question was really a wonderful one to end on, but I would like to add one more because I'd like to round this all off. When we first came in, you saw on the screen the title of tonight's discussion, which is Civil Society, Can We Protect the Rights and Liberties of All Communities? And to close it off, Kareem, I would like to ask you if you think that this is a hopeful assessment or a cynical one regarding the direction that we're heading in.
I'm all about hope. I'm very hopeful. Like I said, it's not an easy task, and it's an ongoing struggle to protect civil rights and civil liberties of everybody. But the good thing is, number one, we have in our country civil society, a very active civil society with a long record of success. I mean, so that's number one. That's something that I would always rely on. Number two, we're a nation of laws. And the primary law of the land is the United States Constitution. We always go back to it. There are different interpretations, obviously, and sometimes the Supreme Court gets it wrong. But we have a process. We have a system of checks and balances. And we need to know how to use that system. And number three, you have the ballot box. You don't like what the fools did in Washington, D.C., kick them out and vote somebody else in. And that's very regular and guaranteed. It works. I was personally extremely active in 2008. Millions of others were. So, that's how change happens. So I'm extremely hopeful. And again, I always like to say take things in a broader context and a historical perspective. Obviously I come from the Arab American community. I am Muslim personally. I mentioned some of the abuses that we saw after 9/11. For 10 years I fought against. But I've always put it into perspective of other communities and what they've had to face in this country to get where they are. And how we work together. That's another key issue, is that because of our diversity, that's a strength. That's a very key strength, is our diversity in the United States. We don't have a national church. We don't have a national language. What unites us? We're not of a single race. There's only one group of Native Americans, and we know who they are. I'm not sure if they're represented here, unfortunately. Maybe. So we do live in a unique society. We do live in a unique country. And I tend to be very optimistic in my view of how we can work together to improve things and move it in the right direction. And whatever the issue is, I mean, I was critical earlier of a certain movement that's taking place now politically that has engaged in hate specifically against Muslims in the U.S. They have a right to do it. They have a right to speech and to mobilize and to coordinate and to vote their own candidates in. I'm going to work doubly hard to make sure that pro-civil rights, pro-constitution, pro-civil liberties candidates are the ones that are elected in, and not based on a single issue. That's primarily irrelevant. So, but I am hopeful.
Kareem Shora, thank you so much for bringing the messages forward.
Thank you.